Okay, I've got a challenge for you.
Go on.
Are you willing to accept the challenge? Depending on it's a question. It's a question. It's not a physical challenge or anything. I want you to steelman your opinion on the EU. Obviously, you're an adamant Remainer. So could you argue the other side for me? Why would somebody want to leave the European Union?
Yeah, if you believe that power should be divested, it should be in the hands of the people, then the closer that power is to the people where they are and where they live, then the better. That's the argument.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that? Do you believe that argument?
I believe it on one level. I believe it in relation to local democracy. And I think it was yesterday. I don't know if you saw Johnson up in Scotland and that ridiculous trip he made.
Yeah, pointless.
Utterly pointless. But one of the things he was sort of defending the union by saying that, I really believe in we should cooperate together. Where we can cooperate together, we should cooperate together. And he thought, well, why have we come out of the European Union then when we're facing all these global challenges?
Yeah.
So he sort of uses one argument that is destroyed by what he's actually done and what he's going to be remembered for in history. But I think that, no, I can see it. But what I can't stand about the whole thing is that, the arguments on which they fought it, particularly sovereignty. Sovereignty is it's not a zero-sum game. Sometimes a sovereign nation will choose to pull its sovereignty. That's a sovereign decision. So yeah, that's that. If I were forced to do it, that's what I would build it on.
Okay, I don't know if you've looked into this story, but one story which I've kept my ear close to, and the greatest fear of mine in regards to the EU. I mean, I obviously side with the Remain side much more than the Leave side, but that doesn't mean I'm not skeptical of parts of the European Union. And I do believe in reform, not remove, and all of that. But the EU investment agreement with the CCP, I mean, you have the EU perfectly willing to brush over the fact there's been mass genocide, racial cleansing, forced labor, to Uyghur Muslims in China. There's also had their, Xi Jinping's erosion of democracy in Hong Kong. And you've also had mafia-like tactics with neighboring states. I mean, the best Europe managed to get in this trade agreement was a tiny bit of transparency and subsidies. I mean, there's nothing.
Well, I think you could bring it closer to home. I think that you look at some of the stuff that's going on in Hungary and Poland at the moment, it fundamentally goes against the values of the European Union, and they are members and they want to keep them as members. And I get that. And I guess what I would say on both of those things is that the bigger you get in the organization as an international organization, then maybe the messier the compromises become. I think sometimes, for example, we talk a lot about the United Nations, and I think sometimes people look at the United Nations, why can't the United Nations sort this out? Why can't the United Nations step in? But all the United Nations is a collection of all the nations of the world. That's all it is. It's not a kind of supranational court that can judge everything. And it's actually it's done some amazing things, but it's a deeply inefficient structure, because emerging as it did from the Second World War, you've got the great powers that were then, they all have this veto, and we happen to be one of them. But what you've seen, you mentioned China. China the other day, in relation to Navalny, the European Union tried to do some reasonably tougher stuff on Putin, but the Hungarians said no. The Hungarians have that power of veto on that thing that was being discussed then. And likewise, the United Nations is not going to do much about the Uyghurs because China's got a veto on the Security Council. So,
are you suggesting that the UN might not be as stable as people believe it to be?
No, I think it is a pretty stable organization. I think it does do a lot of good, but I think people need to stop being so romantic about what it is. It's like, we haven't, when we were doing the whole Iraq thing, and, that was a really difficult time for everybody, but people kept saying, well, we're not going to do it unless the United Nations agrees with it. Well, that means you're not going to do anything unless every country in the world agrees.
Right, which clearly there won't be.
Which they won't, because one of the countries is Iraq.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you have, when you have a situation now where basically because of the sort of geo-strategic power plays going on in the world, you've got the Russians they will step in against anything, not just that they see against their own interests, but that they see as being pro an American or a European interest. So that would be whether that's France or Germany. And, eventually I think the United Nations, I don't see how it sustains this. This is the permanent five. I think it's a very, very, if you're India, if you're Nigeria, if you're Brazil, if you're Mexico, you're kind of looking and thinking, well,
yeah,
you're Turkey. It will have to evolve and change at some point.
Yeah.
But so I listen. I agree with, politics in the end is not, it's not straightforward. There's lots of messy compromises people have to make.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I totally take your point.
Are you fearful of the CCP's sort of moves to supremacy with their trying to take over the Silk Road trade route from Greece, their mass genocide, their sort of clear wrongdoings? Are you fearful of their, they even have suicide nets around their workshops, sweatshops, really, because people don't even have the right to kill themselves. They're slaves. Does it fear you that this could potentially go wrong? It could be the next big chapter.
Oh, listen, I don't think there's any doubt at all that look, you never know what periods of history will be remembered for. It may well be that this is the era of the pandemic, right? It may be that's what, but it may be that I think this is a probability that this is the era of the continuing rise of China, and how the other power blocks in the world deal with that is a very, very, very important question. I think it's why it's a good thing, that another of the many good reasons that Biden won. I think Biden will listen. He'll be into the realpolitik, but he will be into the politics in a way that Trump, I think, never was, either with China or with Russia. So yeah, and the Silk Road thing, if it's a pretty obvious thing to do for a country that has been low down in the power stakes and the wealth stakes and is rising up. So the other countries that goes through, they have to make their own choices. But so I'm probably not as fearful as you sound. You sound very, very fearful.
I kind of believe they're going to be the next I mean, the way they've been treating neighboring states. I mean, they've been forcing. You've obviously read about the damming up of the Himalayas, pretty much annexing India's land. And just completely unjustified, and unknown. And listen, it's awful tactics. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just saying they're all over. They're all over Africa.
Neo-colonization in Africa and Australia.
Their economic power is immense and growing, and they're not a democracy. That much, that much we know.